So when I was at Highland Park Community Church, still pastoring there, we were going to do a relaunch. I'd been there for 2.5 years or so.
Now, is this a more institutional form? This is not what you were telling me about, or this is?
Same place,
Okay.
but I had when I first started pastoring there, I walked into a church that was of 8 well-retired folks, great saints, but the clock was ticking on that church. So about 2.5 years in, me and the leadership team, we developed an idea to do a relaunch, move up to the structure piece of that. And so part of that relaunch was doing some work in the sanctuary, rejigging a few things, cutting some pews in half and reorienting them to make this round sort of gathering.
Yep.
And so there was a little pedestal in the center that was, like pulpit high, but it was this, little thing. And I would stand there and preach, if you will. And then, the rest of the congregation is gathered around me. And there was a candle in the center there. And now outside of that gathering pews was what we called the back porch, which was a cafe space. But as we gathered, people would sit back there as well. Even as I was preaching and we're worshiping. The how we structured that space matched our theology.
Yeah.
That there's this candle in the center who is Christ, and I'm preaching to this gathered community because we are a community by definition.
Yeah.
In the Brethren Church, that is the priority, to be that gathered community. And now, as some of the other folks in the neighborhood would join us, they would typically sit in the cafe space because they weren't quite sure what it meant to be this gathered community. And that candle and that scripture and this person speaking some sort of truth, they're like, I'm not sure about all this yet, but there's something intriguing enough for me to walk through the doors and sit in the back cafe space where I can just sit casually and I don't really have to sing. People won't know if I'm going to sing or if I'm not going to. So we structured that to reflect the theology of this gathered community, what we are gathered around Christ in the scriptures, or Christ who is the scriptures, right?
Yeah.
And yet we have this other interstitial space between the neighborhood, the secular world, and this kingdom community.
Yeah.
So that's when I have to admit, I love to play with this idea that our theology informs our structures. And I think, honestly, we do that without even thinking.
For sure.
I mean, think about even some of the churches built during the Reformation. The size of the pulpits in Lutheran churches, right, compared to Catholic Church, where the center is not the pulpit. The center is the Eucharistic table, right? The structure, how we structure it, reflects our theology.
Yeah.
Catholic churches built after Vatican II, very different theology. Okay, not very different, but tweaking the theology is reflected in how Catholic churches are built today. Yeah. That fascinates me.
Yeah, and when you say theology, I think you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you're talking about multiple facets of it. So what do we believe about humanity? What do we believe about even Christology, and what do we believe about ecclesiology, as far as the nature and purpose of the church, all those pieces put together. And I think you're right. We talk in my program at Denver Seminary. One of the very first classes our Doctor of Ministry students take is a class where they're kind of uncovering what their embedded understood kind of theology is, because they could espouse some systematic thing, for a paper, but really all of us we have these operating systems, whether we're aware of it or not.
That's great.
And so I think last question I want to go there with you is, if that's the reality, that theology, and I would agree, theology defines and shapes our structures, and it's this all these facets of our theology and our understandings, assumptions, and beliefs. What does, you know, Joe or Mary congregant, like you said, I think we don't even think about this. What should we be thinking about and asking ourselves? And not just those of us who are talking on a podcast or teaching in somewhere, like, what do we as members of the body, even playing field, need to think about more?
In general, like wide open field in general?
About this, if there truly is this like underlying theology to it kind of thing. Yeah.
Gosh, that's a good question. What do we need to think about more? I'm going to wrap that in with just things that I've been thinking about lately, particularly my own denomination, where our history comes out of the wed of two traditions, Anabaptist and Pietistic theology. And probably not so unlike many. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily call ourselves evangelical, though it's the air that we breathe in American Christianity. Our history, I think, as American Christians has been to focus on the loving God piece of the command to love God and love others as yourself. And our theology always has reflected that, still does, very much so. But how much does our behavior and how we think about doing church reflect the other side of loving our neighbor as ourselves? And that's a bit of a nudge in another direction that certainly my tradition is thinking about and working at. But I think that, I mean, whether we're up front leading or we're sitting in the pews, the folks are going to take cues off of their leaders and their pastors and their seminary professors. How do we emphasize the other theology of loving one another? And again, in this outrageous kingdom sort of way.
Yeah.
And maybe, so it's the tension between the two. Yes, we love God, of course, and yes, we love our neighbor. We focused so much on this side of it historically that we may need to swing, and that makes people super uncomfortable, particularly in conservative denominations and traditions. But maybe we need to sit and dwell there for a while, abide in that other half of the command just as much as we have abided in the loving God part of that. Though you don't forsake one, right?
Yeah.
We honor and we observe both sides of that tension. So yeah, that's just where my head has been lately. And how do we do that? And how do we do that? I mean, you have to battle through the obstacles of people resisting doing that, which is wearisome.
Yeah.
And thinking through, how do you just get to it?
Yeah.
Start working on it.
Yeah.